development role. Okay, so now we're going to move to Unit 2, Design Education and Training Provision. The aim of this unit is to develop your understanding of how to prepare training in order to support your learners. So this is very much about designing the training provision. The unit is going to cover how we prepare resources from scratch. It is going to cover how we adapt resources. And we're also going to talk about the learning environment, what learning materials we use. We're also going to talk about the equipment, and we are also going to talk about how exactly we put a training and development program together. So this unit is very much about designing the education and training provision. So let's take a closer look at what we're going to be covering. Of course, we're going to start with the purpose of education and training programs, which is always to move the learner from point A, which means where they currently are in terms of their knowledge, skills, and capabilities, to point B, which is where they want to be. That is where their desired knowledge, skills, and capabilities are. So this is something for you to remember when it comes to the primary purpose of education and training. This is to move the learners from point A, where they currently are in terms of their knowledge, to where they want to be, their desired destination, which is point B. We are also going to talk about how we collect learners' feedback and why that is important. So when you think about moving the learner from point A to point B, how has the journey been for them? How can we collect feedback from them so that we can use that to improve our own delivery and the actual content of the training and development programs? But we could also learn that to help them learn better in the future. So it is highly necessary to always ask learners for feedback so that we can ensure that we are continuously improving our delivery, the quality of the training programs. We're supporting our learners on the learning journey, and we are also developing our own delivery styles as well, because the feedback that we're going to obtain will also allow us to identify our own areas of development. Coming back to the training cycle, the training cycle is something that we are going to be working closely with throughout level 4, because this gives us the core foundation of designing, delivering, and evaluating training programs. So for the purpose of Unit 2 and this overview, we're quickly going to go through different stages, which is going to give you a nice overview. And then during the sessions that are part of this level, we are going to go into this in much more detail. So what we need to start with, that is the main thing, is learning needs analysis. So learning needs analysis refers to evaluating the learning needs of our potential learners. What was the purpose of learning and development programs? To move learners from point A to point B. So we have to identify what are the desired knowledge, skills, and capabilities so that we can support them with moving from point A to point B. And there are multiple ways in which this can be achieved, and we are going to talk about this in much more detail during Unit 1. So how exactly do we conduct learning needs analysis? How do we identify the needs of, let's say, employees if you are looking to work within a company, an organization, and how do we also conduct learning needs analysis generally? We look into the different job roles that you can have, and how we conduct learning needs analysis within different roles, but also the main methods of conducting learning needs analysis, so that we can ensure that when we move to the second step of the training cycle, which is designing the training, we know exactly what we need to be including. We should always be taking into account the learning styles, the learning needs, and then we have to be selecting the right learning activities and resources based on the objective of the training and development program. And that objective will always be to move the learners from point A to point B. So the objective would be to supply them with the knowledge and skills that we have identified as desired. So having already identified the learning needs and designed the provision of content that will enable learners to complete the knowledge gap, the learning gap, and acquire the necessary knowledge and skills, we will then deliver. So, what does the delivery stage include? There are different things that we should be thinking about at this stage. One of the main things is the learning environment and how we could always create a positive and inclusive learning environment. We are going to talk about what that really means. What does it mean to create an inclusive learning environment? And we're also going to talk about the different learning styles and preferences and what activities exactly we're going to be using and how, so that all the learning styles are taken into consideration. We also need to think about our delivery pace. So how can we appropriately pace our delivery style, and how could we ensure that we have allocated enough time to the actual, for instance, training class. So all of these things which fall under the delivery stage are going to be discussed during Unit 2. And it's going to be quite interesting for you because we are going to look at some examples from existing companies. So this is going to be definitely something that is going to be theoretical, but also practical, so that you can then see how we can use that in real life and how some companies are using it already. There will be case studies, so you are going to find that quite interesting. Stage after we have already delivered the training is to evaluate its effectiveness. As you could see, there are 4 stages of the training cycle, so evaluation is an essential stage. Having uncovered the learning needs, designed the training to meet those needs, delivered it, now we have to assess how effective the training was. Have the outcomes that we set, the outcomes that were intended to help us move the learners from point A to point B, have they been met? So there are different ways, and that will really depend on the purpose of the training and development program. It will depend on the learners, and once we know that, then depending on obviously the different scenarios, because we're going to talk about different scenarios, then we are going to discuss how exactly we evaluate and assess training. So if you're working for a company, for instance, one way to evaluate the effectiveness of a training and development program that you have designed and delivered is to monitor the performance at the workplace. So for instance, you have designed a training on leadership skills for managers. What you will be looking for is measuring the effect, their leadership skills in terms of how effective they become as leaders throughout the period of time. This is just an example, right? I said we're going to look at different scenarios depending on the purpose of these education and training programs and where and how you're delivering them. But for the purpose of this overview session, let's say you are delivering training to leaders, and it's leadership training. In order to evaluate its effectiveness, you will need to dedicate a certain period of time to monitoring performance and seeing, or perhaps collecting feedback from the team members of the leaders in order to really see whether these objectives have been met and whether the desired skills have been acquired. Behavioral change falls under that as well. depending on the type of training you're delivering. So monitoring behavioral change, monitoring performance, these are some key indicators that can help us measure the effectiveness of our training and development programs. Collecting feedback from learners. So as I said, this is something which is quite important because it allows us to improve as practitioners, but it also allows us to support the learners by evaluating how we deliver the program and what feedback we should be taking on board and then improving on, for instance. So usually feedback is collected straight after the facilitation is finished, and that is usually done through feedback forms. But there are other ways that we can collect feedback, and we're going to talk about that during Unit 2 in much more detail. Assessments, again, that's part of it. We could use assessments depending on the actual training and development program. Assessment is a good way to evaluate whether learning objectives have been met. However, if you're delivering soft skill training, for instance, perhaps assessment tools are not the best because you have to monitor performance. However, if you're delivering training and development on a particular topic that requires people to learn more about certain processes and then we need to test their knowledge, then assessments are appropriate. So Unit 2, we're not only going to look at the different models and the theory behind being effective as training and development practitioners, so what tools and approaches we need to know and utilize, but we're also going to we're going to look at some case studies and scenarios so that you can get some really good overview of what the role of a training and development practitioner includes. Okay, right, is design, education, and training provision. So this was where we explored the training cycle, and the training cycle is one of the key models which all training and development professionals use in order to be effective in their roles as training and development practitioners, right? So this model is going to give this unit is going to give you theories, models, and practical tools that will allow you to be able to complete the training cycle effectively, which means identify the learning needs and making sure that these learning needs are successfully met throughout the training cycle by designing and delivering training effectively. So that is what Unit 2 is all about.